Okay, we're going to take a look at our second unit here, or at least our second week of information for American government. This is kind of what we're going to focus on this week for online learning. And basically what it deals with is civil liberties. It says here, closer look at freedom of religion and speech and what all that entails. Hold on here. Okay, so last week, obviously, one of the things I had you guys do was look at some examples of Supreme Court cases that kind of what are considered those landmark ones. So some of those will be included in this as we go through this. And so the big thing that we're trying to take a look at is, what are those, or what is the relationship between our freedom of religion, freedom of speech, as we look at the Constitution. So first thing, we just want to define what civil liberties are. Civil liberties are fundamental individual rights, such as freedom of speech and religion, protected by law against unwarranted governmental or other interference. So basically, it's those rights that we have that the government cannot take away from us, or what we consider to be civil liberties. And so speech and religion are some of those. Freedom of religion, again, we understand this comes from the First Amendment. And so in the First Amendment, remember, we have those 5 different things. We have a freedom of religion, freedom of speech, press, assembly, and petition, okay? So freedom of religion just says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So there's 2 parts. We're going to look at this idea of the Establishment Clause, and then this other part, which is our Free Exercise Clause. So the Establishment Clause basically just says the government cannot promote religion. And so it's saying that the government cannot create a national religion. Now, when this was originally intended, that was the concern from those founders, that the government would say that everybody has to be Christian, okay? And so they put this in there to deal with that. And so, as it says here, it's a wall of separation between church and state. So Thomas Jefferson, that's who that guy is there, was very famous for saying that we need this idea of separation of church and state. And so he was very concerned about the government creating our own religion. The Free Exercise Clause basically protects our own beliefs, our own practices, and says that we as individuals can choose what religion we want to practice and what we want to do with that. So there isn't any limitation on that, although there are some we'll talk about. There's some different things, and that's kind of what we're going to focus on, or okay, what are the exceptions to some of these things? Okay, so first couple key religion cases. I know my picture's kind of covering that up, but the first one, you can see all the way back in 1878, we had our first example of a Supreme Court case dealing specifically with religion. And that case was the case of Reynolds versus United States. And basically they banned polygamy. So the Supreme Court ruled that the government, although you do have a freedom of religion, can make some rules when it comes to saying things like marriage. And so they did ban polygamy. Again, if you don't know what polygamy is, that's when people have more than one wife or husband. Okay, and so we did ban that. I know a lot of times I get questions on that as far as, well, what about, Mormons? And truly the Mormon church doesn't actually believe in polygamy. There are some Mormons. I know there's some television shows out there that kind of say, oh, this is happening, and really very small instances of it where actually people have more than one wife, and those people actually don't even legally marry those other women. So I mean, they might have a legal marriage to one woman, then they have these other wives that they aren't actually married to legally, and so just understand that's how they kind of get around it. But it is technically legal in the United States to have more than one wife. Okay. Next one, 1943, the West Virginia Board of Education versus Barnett. This is an important case, actually relates to something we talked about in class recently, dealing with saluting the flag, the Pledge of Allegiance, that type of stuff, that you can't be required to do that, forced to salute the flag, do the Pledge of Allegiance based off religious freedom. So again, that relates to your freedoms with religion as your personal beliefs. Okay, so yeah, and the pictures there, the one on the left's obviously of a guy there with multiple wives, but on the right, you can see those kids saluting the flag. So at one time, it's kind of crazy. I mean, we saluted the flag by kind of putting our hands up. That kind of looks similar to the Nazi salute, which we obviously have changed that to where you put your hand on your heart because of World War II and the Nazis. Other religion cases, Engel versus Vitale. This was one of those landmark Supreme Court cases you could have chosen from. I did have a couple people choose this one. Basically, just, it says mandatory school-sponsored or teacher-led prayer. So basically, the Supreme Court here, again, ruled against that idea that schools cannot force students to do school prayer, okay? So you cannot have mandatory school-sponsored prayer. We can't start the day off by having a prayer. I can't say, okay, today, first 10 minutes, we're gonna pray. No, we can't do that. Even it's been extended with other cases to say it can't even be like a non-denominational prayer. So we can't say, okay, we're gonna do a prayer and this isn't in particular to one religion, because it's still violating people's rights, still violating their freedom of religion, that free exercise clause part of it. And so you can't do that now. So there's some people that argue against that. There's some people that think that there should be prayer in school. And so just understand there's different opinions on this. The Abington School District case dealt with the same issue, just kind of extended it to Bible reading. So you can't, again, schools, we can't like have devotional Bible readings. That doesn't mean that schools cannot, like in a history class or something, teach about religion, okay? So I know sometimes people get confused on that and they think, well, you can't teach religion at all. It's not that you're actually teaching religion, you're teaching about it. And so I know in a world history class, for example, or geography class, you probably, when you took those classes, you may have learned about religions and comparing them, because that's part of history. And so you can do that, but you can't do these devotional Bible readings. So we couldn't pull out the Bible and say, okay, today we're gonna read from this book of the Bible. That's different, okay? So you can still teach about it, just can't teach it. Even some school libraries have the Bible in there and Quran and other holy books, because again, they're considered part of history and literature. And so, that sometimes controversial, people don't always agree with that, but that is something that you have. So the question here is so if we have, religion in public school, what's constitutional? So there's some pictures here. This is always one that gets brought up, what about these like prayers that take place, like sporting events and things like that? Or if we're talking about like graduation and, different events, can you have prayers at those events? And it's kind of a gray area. Probably the biggest thing is it just can't be like school sponsored. So like a teacher or a coach cannot lead these things. I'm not saying this never happens, because I absolutely know it does. But it's kind of in a gray area. The concern is, does this violate people's freedom of religion? And if you're doing these things, are some students going to feel like they're forced to do it, even though maybe they don't want to? Okay, so that pressure part of it's always kind of the issue, where if after a game everybody makes a big circle at half court of a basketball game and prays, is that going to pressure some kids who maybe don't believe that into doing it? So that's religion. Let's move on to speech. So freedom of speech, this is a quote from a Supreme Court Justice, Oliver Wendell Holmes, a pretty famous one. He said, "The principle of free thought is not free thought for those who agree with us, but freedom for the thought we hate." So what that means is that when we talk about freedom of speech, all speech is protected. there's exceptions, but the picture here is a great example. Burning the flag. We're going to look at that case. We'll talk about it here in a second. And, you know, that's the thing, is that he's saying that even those things that we don't agree with, people still have a right to say it, as long as it's not violating other people's rights, things like that. So, so basically the Constitution just says Congress shall make no law abridging, sorry, I can't talk today, the freedom of speech, okay? So there are some examples of unprotected speech. So libel, slander are two examples. These are, if you want to think about it, it's like making up rumors about people. So like slander is making false rumors about someone that damages their reputation. So there's some key parts to that. It has to be untrue and it has to damage their reputation, okay? So slander is spoken word. Libel is written, okay? So the pictures hopefully help you with that. So like with slander, you know, that'd be if somebody made up a rumor about somebody. Again, it has to be untrue. So that's the key part. So if somebody says something about somebody and it's true, well, then it's not slander. You know, this is the thing, like, again, in high school, as a high school teacher, you see this all the time. You know, one girl says something about another girl and that, you know, gets blown up and everything, and people are accusing people of stuff. Well, if it's true, it's technically not slander, okay? Now, if it's false, it could be slander. The other key part is it has to damage the reputation. So like if somebody wants to sue someone for this, they have to prove it's untrue and they have to prove it damages the reputation. So how other people look at them. Libel's the written form of it. So the National Enquirer, you know, this is the question I get from students all the time. Well, how can the National Enquirer, you know, print these things like, you can't control me anymore, you know, or things like the Katie Holmes, Tom Cruise, that's a pretty old example, all these, you know, or Britney Spears stuff, or whoever, I guess today, those aren't really popular stars, but, you know, I don't know, Kim Kardashian, you know, is, her real dad is OJ. I remember that was a big one that came out a few years ago. And so, you know, they can get away with it because a lot of times it doesn't damage the person's reputation. Is probably the key part of it. Now, I'm not saying they've never been sued and lost, because National Enquirer, these different ones have, but the person has to prove that it's going to damage their reputation. So if they print this article out there that says, I remember seeing it at the grocery store, Kim Kardashian's real father is O.J. Simpson, you know, does that really hurt her reputation? Probably not. Probably actually helped her make more money, because now all of a sudden people are like, ooh, more interested in Kardashian. So, you know, those types, that's always the key thing. It has to damage the reputation. More unprotected speech, you know, obscenities, fighting words, those are just two examples of things that are not protected. So we've kind of mentioned this before. Freedom of speech doesn't give you that right to just go out and say whatever it is you want to say. You can't go down the street just yelling obscenities, the F word or whatever. So it doesn't protect those things, okay? It's really there to protect us from government. And then fighting words are things that could cause violence. So like here's just an example of a poster, you know, that, you know, George W. Bush was president. You know, is that protected under freedom of speech? Some people are going to argue yes, but it's really not, because some people are going to say, well, no, because of the fact that this could cause violence towards someone. It's like this poster here is an example of that, because it's like, hey, you know, go kill the president. You can't, those are things you can't say. Okay. So things like that, again, you can say you don't like a politician. So you can say, hey, I don't like the president. You can speak out against him. But once it gets to the point where someone is actually proposing violence or saying they're going to hurt that person, then it's not protected. So people get in trouble for this type of stuff all the time. Some other key cases just to go through with freedom of speech. We'll try to get through this pretty quick, finish up. Schenck versus United States, 1919, was dealing with a guy who was speaking out against World War I. He was arrested, and basically he lost his case, went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they ruled that it was a clear and present danger test that they used, or this doctrine that basically said what he was saying was getting people to oppose the law. So you can say things again, but if it gets people to break the law, then it falls under this clear and present danger test, and that's not protected by the government. You can't do that. You can't say, hey, let's go out and break the law, whatever it is, okay? Yeah, that one, the Tinker case, is really important for students. Basically, two brother and sister came to school with black armbands on. I think we might have, I don't know if we mentioned this one before, we might have, protesting the Vietnam War. They're told to take them off, or they'll be suspended. The next day they come back, they get kicked out of school. And basically the Supreme Court rules that they cannot limit your freedom of speech with that type of thing. So they weren't doing anything that was actually disrupting class. They were wearing a black armband. That's actually a picture of them. You can see they're only like 15, 14 years old. So that type of speech is protected. Silent speech basically in school is protected. And then the Texas case with flag burning is also protected. And again, I know that's one that people don't agree with. They don't agree with it on a personal level. They think it's unpatriotic. And for a lot of people it is. In this case, Johnson, this guy was burning the American flag in protest of the government, and he won. And they said, you know, freedom of speech is more important than the government, or sorry, more important than the flag. And he's protesting, so it's a form of protest. Again, we're not saying that you have to agree with it, but that's what the Supreme Court has ruled on that. Other ones, hate speech, and this is a big one. This is a tough one. You know, we've had cases like this actually in Nebraska. Is kind of where some of these originated, where there's a church in Kansas, the Westboro Baptist Church, that goes and protests at military funerals. And, you know, here's some pictures of that. You can see kind of the stuff, you know, that they do at these funerals. I mean, on the bottom left, you know, they basically have tried to connect the war and soldiers being killed in war, and saying that happens because of the fact that the American government supports gay rights. And yeah, and so they go and they do this. And there was a case in Nebraska where they were at a funeral and they threw the flag on the ground, and they were little kid was jumping up and down on it, might even peed on it at one point. And, you know, the Supreme Court gets this case, and it's a tough one because here again, do they have the right to say this? And, you know, the thing is, they ruled that unfortunately they do. Okay, this is one most people aren't going to agree with, that even speech like this is protected. Now, hate speech that's going to cause violence towards other people is not. But in this case, they allowed it, and basically said that as long as they are on public property, on the sidewalk or somewhere, they can protest at these funerals. Now, other groups have taken this into their own hands and tried to prevent them from doing this. Like, we have some, I can't remember what the group's called, but it's a group of motorcyclists and like around in Nebraska, different states, that will go and they'll like stand between these people and people at these funerals. I haven't heard anything recently with this group, but I do know they're constantly doing stuff. And yeah, not everybody agrees with it, but it unfortunately still protected. Now, hate speech overall not protected. So you can't go out there and like spread racist thoughts, things like that. You know, you can get arrested for that type of stuff. Okay, so religion, speech, kind of our focus this week. So again, this will be on Google Classroom. You can take a look at it through YouTube, as well as I'll just have the presentation. You don't have to necessarily listen to me talk. Maybe you want to, but you can just click through the slides too. But hopefully this helps you understand it. All right, have a good day.